Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto video. This is going to be my speculation ahead of Boruto Chapter 62. So Chapter 62 is going to be coming out on the 20th of September, so 9 days away from when I record this video, not too long to go. Chapter 62 is going to be the third of the, chapters in the volume it will be in. So the positioning of the chapters is often important to realize, in that it's not a volume ending chapter, it's not a volume opening chapter, it's one of the ones in the middle. But because it's the third and not the second, the idea realistically it should be, especially given that it's also going to be sort of the seventh chapter of sort of story setup since the last sort of major event, this should be the chapter that sort of puts things into place so that we can have a big volume ender and then go into some pretty big stuff. So this should finally, I suppose, maybe transition us from mostly setup into finally getting some stuff going. So that's my speculation on just sort of what I think this chapter will attempt to sort of accomplish in a broader sense. Now, let's get into the specifics on what happened in 61, just in case you haven't read it in a while. It wasn't the most eventful chapter, but there was a few kind of key things. The most major, I suppose, reveal was that Boruto and Kawaki, as being nearly completely Otsutsukified characters, do gain some of the other inherent abilities of Otsutsukis, which they reveal here is 1, the ability to null or erase their chakra signature, and then 2, that the sort of counterpoint to that they also seem to be the only ones capable of seeing through that same nulling ability, which is why Kawaki is able to avoid the barrier, the chakra barrier that tracks people's signatures around the Leaf Village, but it's also at the same kind of core ability why Boruto is the only one to really see through Kawaki's ploy and be able to know exactly where he is, because they've both been Otsutsukified due to a karma mark. So that's kind of key, that they're getting across that idea that even though Kawaki currently doesn't have a karma mark, he's still mostly Otsutsuki. Boruto, of course, is still undergoing the kind of karma extraction, though the pills that he's taking is halting that slightly. We probably need a more detailed update on that, but that is a thing. But he is, slowly and surely being Otsutsukified. So that's that. On the other side of the story, probably one of the bigger reveals that I think will tie into the last big thing in the chapter is that Sasuke has been investigating Code's claw marks outside of the village to try and figure out where Code is going to pop out when he attacks the Leaf Village. He seems to be aware he's not going to pop out here, and then given that the chapter ends with Kawaki leaving the village to go and confront Code, and Code, through Ada's help, is being sort of guided to where Kawaki is, they're going to have a meeting. Code has obviously popped out close to the village, meaning that Sasuke probably will make an appearance and join that sort of conversation at some point between Code and Kawaki. So this is where I think a lot of the speculation kind of has to come out here, because realistically, the only thing we properly know going into the next chapter is that I guess we are going to have a confrontation between Code and Kawaki, and that Sasuke will likely join in that conversation, and Boruto will likely try and go after them. Now, Boruto is being watched himself, so I guess, will Boruto use his ability to null? Will he suddenly try and connect to that and secretly leave the village himself? Or will he tell other people and there'll be a big confrontation outside the Leaf Village? It depends on how, basically the writing choice about if they want to make this a big battle incident here, this is where it's going to take place, or if they want to keep it kind of rather low-key with only a few characters involved. Because obviously we're waiting for the kind of big battle to happen here, because, we're expecting a time skip at some point, but that seems like it's maybe a little bit on hold, whereas we were maybe expecting it to happen almost a few chapters ago, but we'll see how it happens. The big thing for me is, what's Kawaki's like intent in all of this? What is he going out of the village to do? He sneaks out. He doesn't tell anyone. Um, Let me just get the dialogue that he has with Boruto. The one thing he says when Boruto sort of finds him out is that he says rather just like coolly, just keep your voice down. It'll be trouble if they find out, which gives me the impression this is not. It's we think maybe Kawaki's being a little bit silly with what he's doing here, but it's maybe a little bit more thought out than you actually would think. So I don't know. We definitely have to see how it plays out. But one option is that like I think they're setting up that they're going to have more of a talk, because quite clearly Kawaki does not have the power to match Code at all. So what's happening here is that it doesn't make any sense for Kawaki to sort of like, this is his betrayal. That's not going to happen. But he might talk to Code to try and convince Code to be like, hey, I know you want revenge against like me, Boruto, Sasuke, and Naruto. What about I just willingly go with you, and that basically solves your problem? You have me, so you have your sacrificed for the Ten Tails, because of course Code is still planning to go ahead with the chakra tree, the divine tree chakra fruit plan, and the key part that he needs of all of that is an Otsutsuki to sacrifice to the Ten Tails so that the Ten Tails can grow into a tree. So that is, I guess, it has to be Kawaki or Boruto. That's his sort of goal to support Ishiki's kind of final words. He also wants the revenge, which is against the people I mentioned just a minute ago. But the question here is going to be about which matters more to Code. Can Kawaki convince him to be like, give up trying to basically hunt Naruto, Boruto, and Sasuke? I'll fulfill your plan by going along with you, and it'll be sort of the sacrifice of Kawaki in this case. That could be an interesting way to go about things, because that would then create a little bit of a dynamic where, you know, let's say Sasuke gets there just in time to find that Code is taking Kawaki with him. Because again, you have to connect the dots that they've introduced a few select powers that obviously Ada and Demon have specific powers, but they also specifically noted that Code can transport people back with him, but I think he mentions it's just sort of like one person at a time, which would make sense that he has the ability to bring Kawaki with him if he needs to. The other setup for a character perspective is that Ada wants to meet either Boruto or Kawaki to see if she can get one of them to sort of fall for her without her powers activating, because her powers only don't work on her relatives or Otsutsukis. So that's an interesting take on it, in that to me it would make the story a little bit more interesting in a way to actually have Kawaki be on the sort of within the villain group. He's still mostly allied with the Leaf Village, but now a lot of his time is more going to be sort of alongside these characters, and it will be more of a, I suppose, Kawaki retrieval mission, I suppose, along the lines of the Sasuke retrieval mission. That would be, I think, quite interesting, because then there is a reason to, we want to save Kawaki to show that we care. There's intensity surrounding the idea that, Kawaki is here basically just to be sacrificed, but also that Ada wants to actually form a connection with him. And then the dynamic I haven't really touched on too much, the Code Kawaki personal dynamic of, we know they basically underwent the same sort of procedures, but it basically it mostly failed in Code's case, where like he has the power but he can't be a vessel, whereas Kawaki, it succeeded. And I'm wondering if there's more jealousy than we maybe have almost been presented so far of Code towards Kawaki, because here is, to Code, here is his god's chosen person, Kawaki, the person Code could not be. He could not be the vessel, but Kawaki, ungrateful Kawaki, didn't want to be Ishiki's vessel. That's going to be an interesting dynamic to sort of see that play out and see like how exactly this all happens. the other thing to keep in mind in all of this is that eventually we know Kawaki gets a karma mark again. But, you know, what's the deal there? At the moment, the only karma in play that is active in the way we kind of usually think of it is Momoshiki. But you have to remember that the setup with Code is that if he does eat the fruit of a divine tree, eat a chakra fruit, Ishiki basically said you will become an Otsutsuki. So that would introduce a new Otsutsuki into play. And I guess that would mean Code is then able to put karma marks on people. So, you know, there's a few things that need to play out, of course, because to get to that stage, someone needs to be sacrificed to the tree. There's only 2 characters really that fit that bill, and I can't see them killing off Boruto or Kawaki to make that happen, given that Boruto and Kawaki are both needed to fulfill the future Chapter 1 situation here. So can we even do that? Which would then suggest that the only way to really fulfill the conditions of that opening sequence are that Kawaki also gets Momoshiki's karma at some point. But we're unfamiliar with exactly how the karma mark can be used when the Otsutsuki is technically dead at the moment and not really capable of really giving people karma. So it's unclear if like that sequence is going to happen here, or if we're going to have to wait a little bit to get to the whole like figuring that stuff out. But either way, like I said, I think there's some cool dynamics that they could do. Simply just Code and Kawaki talking is really, really interesting. Just to figure out what Kawaki's trying to accomplish with all of this, see how Code responds to Kawaki, given that like we know that theoretically they have a bit of an interesting dynamic, but we don't really know exactly how they interact with each other. If he does end up bringing Kawaki back to his headquarters, then it introduces the idea of, oh, Ada meets Kawaki, Demon and Kawaki, and so on. It creates a bit of a story surrounding the other characters wanting to get Kawaki back. And that's quite interesting, because you're going to have people like Shikamaru feeling like, oh, I knew Kawaki would do something like this, and being suspicious of him once again, but characters like Naruto and Boruto sticking by Kawaki. And that's kind of interesting. But I think the key thing, and I think part of the reason why Chapter 61 had that whole scene with Amado and Shikamaru talking, and why the ultimate takeaway from that scene was the idea that Amado says that all of Kawaki's actions are informed by his care for Naruto, is that he's leaving the village, going against orders, evading capture, to, I think, somehow create some sort of a deal where he can give himself over to Code in exchange for saving Naruto's life. Because I suppose from Kawaki's perspective, he wants to avoid a fight, if at all possible, because the only 2 characters that are really, I suppose, capable of really going up against Code are Naruto and Sasuke. And Kawaki has to know that now that Naruto's weakened without Kurama, that he would probably die in a fight against Code. So avoiding and getting Code off the idea of I need to avenge Ishiki by killing Naruto is probably forefront of his mind in terms of something that he wants to accomplish. And I think that's the one thing, going back and looking at Chapter 61, is that I think they're really directing you down that path, that's what he will try to discuss with Code, is just a deal so that a fight doesn't happen right now, but also it feels like we are going to have to get a fight, because like Demon's abilities are perfectly set up for the idea that he gets involved in a fight. Ada, of course, has different abilities. But then the other thing that you almost forget, because they didn't discuss it last chapter, but I think they introduced it in the chapter before, is our new ally. Our new sort of cyborg character that Amado has kind of brought back. And what's the situation there? I think we're all thinking it is Delta, but now Delta on our side, which would be quite interesting to see if they finally get around to revealing what the details are there. It would be interesting if maybe it was some sort of a Kashin Koji thing, where like it's the second Kashin Koji clone. I suppose Kashin Koji being a clone of Jiraiya opens the door to it could be another Leaf Shinobi who died, who is now a cyborg sort of clone, and that could be kind of close to anyone realistically. It's hard to really, I suppose, properly predict who that could or could not be. But I still think Delta probably seems like the kind of slightly more interesting dynamic, just because, you know, we know there's some sort of a connection between her and Amado, we think. The difference of she's been the villain, but now she's on our side. How exactly they go about explaining that could be quite interesting. But yeah, beyond that, it's sort of hard to really predict exactly what's going to go on. Like I said, the other thing is that Sasuke probably will find Code in Kawaki before anyone else does. What does he do? How does he get involved? Because Sasuke versus Code on paper seems like a decent fight, but Sasuke doesn't have the Rinnegan anymore, so, you know, where is Sasuke's power level, and has he done anything to sort of mitigate the losses that he's going to suffer? What can he do against the might of Code in this instance? And this is where a lot depends on. Okay, Sasuke holds off Code for a little bit as Boruto, Naruto, and, you know, someone else arrives, like Kakashi or someone like that arrives, and they can put up a show or put on a bit of a show until whatever happens. It is definitely leaning more into the idea of we probably need Boruto to go into some sort of a karma power mode, or Momoshiki to come through to really facilitate, you know, any sort of the power is in the hero's favor. Really, Momoshiki through Boruto is probably the only way that actually happens. And I suppose that just creates another bit of an interesting dynamic, because, again, with Boruto, he hasn't really been that much of a focus in the recent chapters, and so we're still waiting to see, like, is there going to be any more of an effect of the drugs that he's taking on him, that maybe Momoshiki can't come out in some way, or it impacts things at all. I'm not sure. But beyond that, like, we know we're still suspicious of Amado. We think he has more goals at play than we suspect. I don't know if next chapter is going to be where that happens. It feels like we'll get some big Amado reveals eventually, but I don't know if the setup for it to happen, like, immediately now is even here. So that's a bit sort of all over the place. Of course, just as a fan, I think everyone has pointed this out, I'd like to see Sarada, Mitsuki, maybe even Sumire get a little bit more attention, just because, you know, everyone has high hopes that eventually we get around to some really cool kind of power-up reveals and character moments for Sarada through her growth, but the manga just doesn't seem to have that at the focus of its attention, and I don't know how quickly we're going to be able to organize a fight where most of Team 7 is involved. This is where the almost dropped plot point that, like, Boruto and the rest of the team are going to do some sort of training kind of comes into play, in that if they'd done a straight up training arc, it would have been cool, because the characters would have come out of it capable of doing a lot more, but they haven't committed to that at all. So again, we'll see where they go. It's a weird one in that I kind of go into this upcoming chapter kind of feeling like a little bit undercooked. Like, I don't have, like, incredibly high hopes for it, but the story is just at such a point where there's always the potential for this to be the chapter where it kicks off. Everything kicks into gear. So I'm hoping it's this one. I think the positioning of it as the third of 4-volume book is good in that this should be the transition into bigger things happening, and it might help us figure out the kind of sequence of events. And yeah, I suppose maybe people are a little bit sleeping on just how important the Kawaki code interaction is going to be. So there's my speculations, but in the comments, let me know how you felt about what I had to say, but also if you have your own different speculations of your own, let's discuss them in the comment section. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.